Man, you don't want to know what posture I have to do in order to do this kind of runny thing. Hello and welcome to this review of my first keyboard. To everyone who just got triggered at this grammatical incongruity, I didn't name the damn thing. The My First Keyboard was designed for young children mainly as a spill-proof input device, which is good because if it had been designed for average computer users, one can only imagine what spong-licking twat piper came up with this device. This keyboard is a donation from none other than Clint Basinger, also known as LGR, who tested its peanut butter proof qualities as well as its gaming performance while being covered in gloopy foodstuffs, and who was nice enough to pass it on to me. Thankfully, the board apparently cleans well. The video is pretty hilarious. Click the link in the description below to see it if you haven't yet. Now, based on his video, I figured it would be pretty terrible, but it actually turned out to be much worse than I had expected. So if you're not a fan of profanity, you might want to tune out soon because there will be a lot of it during the course of this review. The keyboard is basically built like one of those industrial control panels with blister buttons, and the sensing assembly was subsequently peanut butter proof with more glue than an Apple product, and as such it's highly resistant to industrial calamities, or even worse, small children. Now, Clint already showed in great detail how it's built and what the history behind it is, and his smear tests looked like they were as thorough as they were messy, so I'll consider its peanut butter proof powers tried and true, but there was relatively little feedback on what it's actually like to use in day-to-day operations, which I guess is why he managed to stay polite during his video, whereas I most certainly won't. And yes, that means I gave this blasted botheration my usual full week of use, and for once the people could actually watch this in action, as most of my comments and replies during this testing phase were uncapitalized and contained no punctuation. People even inquired what was going on, that I had so suddenly changed into what essentially looked like chav speak, to which I responded that I was testing a particularly vile keyboard at the moment, because by the prophet's bushy arse beard, this thing really is 50 shades of fucked. Let's start with the switches, and I'm really using the term switches in its loosest possible definition here. Basically, these buttons consist of a plastic cover over a set of membranes. Yeah, that's it. This setup is exactly the sort of thing you'd find in a rubber dome keyboard, except that in those there were rubber domes and actual keycaps above the membranes to provide, you know, a typing feel. Now, if you thought rubber domes are bad, this'll really make you think twice. There's all sorts of things in a rubber dome keyboard that you'll be begging for once you've used this slimy sphincter clown of a keyboard for a few minutes. For example, key travel. You know, it's surprisingly nice when the switches actually move when you press on them. It's underrated, really. The one good thing about this sort of system is that it's very easy to wash off your kids' peanut butter, poop, vomit, or whatever else they felt like smearing all over it. In this regard, it's a bit like one of those foldable silicone keyboards that I reviewed a while back. But the bad thing is that, again, like the silicone keyboard, it's completely nightmarish to use. You must really consider your child an annoying little pissworm if you want to punish their underage ass by inflicting this cruel and unusual punishment on them. Now, when I watched LGR's video, there was a clicky type of noise or something when he pressed the key, so until I actually got it, I thought that maybe there was some kind of really low-profile actual switch or a clicker or something under there, so I didn't think it would be undiluted diarrhea or anything, especially because he specifically mentioned he thought that these switches weren't the absolute worst he had tried. However, as it turns out, the clicky noise is actually the cover sticking to the membranes after they've been mushed together and subsequently ripping off again. How delightful! To add to it, they included a speaker module that makes a little beep every time you press a key, but it sounds really muffled. Let's call it an arse whistle. Obviously, they did this because, of course, there's no typing feedback from actually touching the keyboard, not even a bottoming out feel or anything. The arse whistle beeping multiple times in quick succession betrays a serious limitation of this keyboard. For those who thought that typing directly on a set of membranes was actually a good idea, you'll notice that it actually chatters a fair bit, which means it's liable to output a character more than once per key press, if key press is actually a term that applies here. I'll see if I can trigger it a few times for you. It really reminds me of that laser projection keyboard I tested a while ago, which was a real cunt bag shit puddle of its own. And just like the projection keyboard, typing on this for a while can start to hurt your fingers a bit. Actually, maybe that was done on purpose, you know, to prevent those peanut butter loving, tangerine munching mouse potatoes from sitting behind the computer for too long, right? Just hurt their fingers into taking a break. I guess unlike the projection keyboard, it does actually work properly most of the time, which is a bonus, definitely, you know, when your keyboard works. And the key feel is maybe not as bad either, but honestly, in terms of key feel, I might even prefer the Smith Corona leaf springs to this ass-fucked soup chicken. Jesus, cheese-sniffing Christ on a deserted tropical island, I'd rather wank in a bag of nettles. But honestly, that's just the key feel. One might argue that the layout is even worse. Double damn it to hell and back again in a cheese basket. This might be its crowning shit tribute. Now, just to preface this, some of my more long-term viewers will know that I always have a backup keyboard on standby. Usually it's located out of view on the side there. At the moment it's the IGK61 with Novel Keys cream switches, which I'll be reviewing next week as it happens. Now, when you review this many keyboards, and especially when you're swapping them over constantly, it's useful to have a backup nearby, especially if the board I'm testing doesn't work very well or is missing a lot of buttons or something. But by the Virgin Mary's sacred melon tits, I've never had to rely on my backup keyboard even half as much as I did when I was testing this vexing vituperation. First off, it uses an alphabetical layout rather than QWERTY, and I can see why some would think that this is a good thing. I mean, the keyboard is meant for 1.5 to 5-year-olds, so in a way it helps them with learning the alphabet. I could counter-argue that that's a case of mollycoddling and that starting off early on an actual keyboard layout would have its advantages as well, but hey. I mean, when I was 3 years old, I was already using QWERTY in the form of this IBM 5155 keyboard, and my young nieces and nephew were using QWERTY on iPads and smartphones as well, so I really think this alphabetical layout is anti-useful, but fine, let's agree to disagree. What's much worse and much more inexcusable is how cripplingly few keys there actually are on the board. There's 55 in total, which includes all numbers, letters, only 10 F keys, which is weird because this thing is from the mid-90s, by which time the last 2 F keys had been out for almost 10 years, 4 arrow keys, an enter key, caps lock, escape, and a spacebar, and that's actually it. It's got fewer keys than even a 60% keyboard. However, unlike a 60%, there's no way to get the missing keys back with layers, for example. In fact, considering there's no Control, Alt, or even a Shift button, nor any punctuation marks, you can't even get basic characters like exclamation marks, parentheses, commas, full stops, apostrophes, or question marks, nor can you capitalize words unless you want to keep toggling caps lock on and off, so everything you type becomes an unpunctuated mess. You're basically literally teaching your kids to write in texting language, and that's really not something I think responsible parents should encourage. Now, I get that they didn't want their kids to Control-Alt-Delete their computer all the time, but really if that was the big problem, they could just block that combination. In fact, they could literally configure the 2-key rollover around this issue. But what you don't want is a keyboard that can't even perform basic functions. I mean, what's the point? Just as a test, try not using any of the modifier keys, nav commands, or punctuation marks on your keyboard for a week and see how you like it. You know, in fact, take the top off and type directly on the membranes to really get a feel for it. I mean, fine, I get it, it's designed for kids, but surely it's supposed to still work at least. This thing is so asinine, you'd suspect it was designed by someone with an IQ lower than the legal drinking age. Fuck all the designers' respective mothers. So, all that's left is to play some games on it. Now, Clint already played some games with all kinds of crap smeared all over it, so I'm not going to do that, but he did rebind his controls to BNOP, for example, to be able to play properly. However, as a true hardcore PC gamer, it's WASD for me all the way, so I'm not going to rebind any of my controls, plus I couldn't be bothered. Anyway, this makes WASD suddenly look very challenging. In fact, I had to use the backup keyboard for a lot of inputs, like the modifiers too. Here's some short clips. A full-length video of me playing a variety of games on this is coming out tomorrow. That's the wrong one. Ah, come on. I'll just see if I can kill him. Haha! All the pets are free on this level. Johnny may now exit. We shall. Overall, this keyboard is bad, but by the almighty saviour's holy jizz rag, it's bad. Avoid this thing. I mean, if you want to get your kids a keyboard that's expendable, just get any old cheap rubber dome keyboard and toss it every once in a while. Don't curse them with a piece of shit like this that's both highly unpleasant and unusable. I mean, back in the mid-90s, this thing cost $100, so it's not like it was cheap or anything, despite being possibly the cheapest to make of any model of keyboard I've seen to date. Or, you know, if you don't want to do that to them, let them grow up on something expendable but useful, like some ultra-cheap Chinese gaming keyboard, and then give them a proper keyboard when they're done drooling and vomiting all over it constantly. I mean, that's the least that any loving parent could do, right? Besides, the kids would probably actually like the RGB. Win-win. Or if you just absolutely hate your children and want to really, really punish those foul-smelling little shits that you inadvertently brought forth, go ahead and actually buy one of these. After a few weeks, they'll be begging to be belted again instead. They might even ask for the wrench. So if that's your thing, forget those medieval relics and upgrade to this mid-90s torture device instead. Honestly, I'm glad that this wasn't my first keyboard, or I'd be traumatized, but having used it for a full week, I feel almost as bad, and my adult mind is on the verge of shattering. Fuck this goddamn testicle violin of a keyboard. Anyway, that's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard at 17 words per minute. Yes, I measured it.